Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Stars Like Us. I am your host, Aliza Kelly, and today I am here with a Cancer Sun and Cancer Moon, which means that our guest is a new moon baby who also happens to have a Sagittarius Rising. I am here with Shelley Tagleski, the author of Sit Down to Rise Up, the founder of the global grassroots mutual aid organization, Pandemic of Love. Her work has been featured by over 100 media outlets, including CNN Heroes, The Kelly Clarkson Show, CBS This Morning, The New York Times, and The Washington Post. A trauma mindfulness teacher and a Garrison Institute fellow, she has been called one of the 12 powerful women of the mindfulness movement by mindful.org and teaches self-care and resilience at organizations around the world. I have Shelley's book here, Sit Down to Rise Up. I think that our listeners need to know that the foreword is by Chelsea Handler. And then also at the top of the book is more praise from, just someone named President Joe Biden, casual. But before we turn to you, I want to also share with our listeners a little bit more about what this book is and what your work entails. So a Sit Down to Rise Up is organized in 3 sections: me, we, and us. And each of these sections shed light on this concept of agency, the trouble with positive thinking, what self-care really is, what the power of showing up entails, and how we need to urgently extinguish the stigma attached to asking for help, and the support and concept of equity, and what mutual aid really is. So it is such an honor to have you here. And I'm so excited to learn about the work that you're doing and what this all means. So thank you, Shelley, for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So would you mind sharing with our listeners, catch us all up to speed? How did this all come to be? What were you doing prior to 2020? And then what has changed since then?
Well, I guess I'll quickly start at the beginning, and if you need any more kind of color and you want me to give you some more details about something specific, I'm happy to do so. But I was born in Jerusalem, on my father's side, 19th generation born in Jerusalem. On my mother's side, a very much, first generation literate woman who, one generation removed from a woman in a mountaintop in Baghdad, Iraq, who was airlifted into Jerusalem in 1949. And definitely a lot of intergenerational trauma that I've had to work throughout my life. But my parents came to the US when I was 2 years old to New York City, and then subsequently moved to Miami, Florida, which my mom liked a lot better than New York City in the 1970s. And I grew up in a traditional Sephardic, which means like Middle Eastern, not Eastern European. So very like traditional Sephardic Orthodox Jewish family. And I grew up in a very, in a bubble, like really in a middle-class suburban Jewish bubble. And I was really the black sheep of the family. I was the youngest of, older brothers, and also was going to a secular school. So I had a lot of confusion about that because my parents couldn't afford to send all of us to Jewish day school. So of course the daughter gets sent to secular school. And so, which was a blessing in disguise for me. Fast forward, I went to undergraduate, was a pre-med student, have my degree in biology and chemistry, which I do not find useful in any way in my day-to-day life. And I wound up as a graduate student at Columbia University in New York City in the 90s, studying, getting a master's of public policy, studying business, and really had this like naivety, which I think a lot of us have when we're young, that we're going to change the world and we're going to make a difference, I I realized after I graduated with a lot of student loans that, you know, I had to go into the business world to help pay those off for a quote unquote a few years. I wound up being in the business world for 2 decades, and actually, in spite of myself, I will say, rising up in the ranks, rising up in the corporate ladder, and eventually making my way up to being the president and CEO of a mid-sized company with 2,400 employees in 14 markets across the United States. But I had never been more miserable in my life. You know, I was making more money than I ever made in my life. Was incredibly miserable, and I left that world in 2015 to become a full-time mindfulness teacher. Now, that sounds like a huge leap, but what you should know is that I started to meditate in graduate school in the 90s, and meditation was very much a personal practice for me. It was not something I ever thought I'd be teaching to large swaths of people. But it has brought so much peace and stability, tranquility to my life. I think it's really given me an edge, and I actually think that it was what helped me. It was kind of like a superpower that helped me, you know, continue to excel in a lot of the pursuits, professional pursuits, and communal pursuits as a community organizer and activist. So, you know, I left to really start to turn my attention and focus on just all of the afflictions and the stress and the turmoil and the strife that I saw happening in the corporate world, thinking that I would be a meditation teacher or mindfulness teacher that goes into the corporate world and teaches. And I wound up actually not doing that at all. I did that for like one day. I went to one client, sat in a boardroom with, you know, around a table similar to one that I had been at many times before. And I thought, this is not where I belong. Like, I left this world and I really need to leave this world. And as luck would have it, you know, the election was around the corner. I was incredibly devastated in 2016 by the election outcome, like many people. And I wound up thrusting my energy and my time and my entirety to helping social justice organizations and political organizers, activists, not burn out, and use mindfulness and resilience tools to be in it for the long haul, because I knew that we were in a marathon and not a sprint. And I was watching people burn out left and right between 2016 and 2020, and still, you know, to this day, to some extent. And so really that's, you know, sort of how I got my start in sort of being the mindfulness teacher for activists. And that led me to a lot of different places, like, you know, being from South Florida and having a son that was in high school at the time of the Parkland shooting. I became really involved with the March for Our Lives movement, and became very intricately involved with gun violence communities, communities affected by gun violence and mass shootings all around the country. And that's still work that I do to this day.
So, you know, when you mentioned the election in 2016 and sort of anticipating the burnout, you know, obviously the strong emotional reaction for anyone who's listening to this podcast, and of fear and concern, and just like I mean, as I kind of return in my psychic body to 2016, the outcome of the election was so bleak, and it was also so disconcerting. It was, it really illuminated a lot that in the previous administration was, you know, it was not as obvious, was not as visible, at least, you know, at that time for me. I had been in college and then moved back to New York City, and then was living in Los Angeles. So I was moving through these very, you know, liberal bubbles in, you know, various sort of like arts and culture backgrounds. So certainly 2016. And I remember I organized a Planned Parenthood fundraiser like, that very weekend following right after the election. But you're right. I mean, there was between 2016 and then the following election in 2020, there was a significant amount of burnout, Stockholm syndrome, exhaustion, fatigue, and we haven't even talked about the pandemic yet.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was but I think that it's interesting to frame and to sort of remind ourselves of what was going on even before there was a global pandemic that just took everything, that really moved everything to the next level, that there was already so much exhaustion and there was already so much burnout that hadn't really been processed collectively prior to something that then was unprecedented, even beyond belief and even beyond any politics would imagine.
Yeah. And I think to that point, I think we're still very much, there's a lot of trauma that's unprocessed at this moment and at this point that is going to reveal itself and going to show up in many different ways for especially for young adults, in this country, right? Like our people that are currently in middle school, high school, and then, our younger millennials that are trying to get out there and start their lives, in the workforce, which I'm sure you could empathize with. But I think that, that the fact that we, as a society, have not provided the tools to build presilience and precovery, which are two terms that Dr. Amishi Jha at the University of Miami has come up with, and I love those two terms. But the fact that we, as a society, talk so much about resilience, we prize resilient people and the bounce back ability of individuals, but we don't really talk about the what needs to happen prior to that. It kind of gives people this notion that you're either born as a resilient person or you're not, and it's like inherently encoded in your DNA, which is not really the case. It's something that every person can actually build to and aspire to have, that kind of rainy day fund for the times when the proverbial shit hits the fan.
Right. So, and in your work is that, and that's the mindfulness practice. The mindfulness practice is the preparation for the, or maybe I'm wrong, maybe that isn't how it works, but so let me rephrase it. What is the prep work for resilience?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I talk a lot about in the book that it's really about creating formalized self-care plans for ourselves and understanding exactly what our self-care plans consist of, what our pillars are, and what our obstacles are that get in the way of us enacting those things on a regular basis. And it's mostly about moving away from this notion that self-care plans are individualistic. I understand the term self is in there, so people automatically think, well, self is I, it's the me that's in this body. But I think you and I can probably both agree that, that I and me that is in this physical body extends far beyond this physical body, right? Our energy emanates every conversation, every interaction that we have with anybody ever, past, present, that we will have in the future. It completely like sets a different, course for people and a trajectory for ourselves and for others. And so to believe that, it's just the I, the singular I is erroneous. We have to really start to move into thinking about self-care as a communal pursuit and understand that we are interconnected and intraconnected, meaning that we have to rely on each other to build these beautiful safety nets that used to exist years ago, from the clans time period when we were living in caves as clans and we were nomadic tribes, to even not so long ago, before the Industrial Revolution, when people really kind of use their community or their church or their religious kind of organizations as a means to connect as a community and create equity, and to make sure that everybody in their community had enough, right? And that we had this inherently understood moral compass that we were responsible for one another, and that if something went wrong in our life, somebody would show up for us, and that we are therefore responsible to show up for other people. So that's really, kind of the first part of it. The second part is that, people oftentimes think about meditation and mindfulness, really, like, let's use those terms interchangeably for the purpose of this conversation, are tools to use to help us feel more comfortable with ourselves, more comfortable with our lives, with what's happening in our lives. And it's actually, in my opinion, the exact opposite. I think that what the tools have provided, for me at least, and as I've seen for other people, is the ability to sit with extreme discomfort and to not react, but rather respond to what's happening in the world, in our lives, that is extremely painful, uncomfortable, just kind of the worst of it. And it allows us to take a step back, to almost have that matrix moment and press pause and really think about, even if it's just sort of in a nanosecond, do I go right or do I go left? Blue pill or red pill, if you will. And so that's been the gift that really, I think meditation has provided for me, and being like a meditator for over 20 years, specifically of the loving kindness practice of metta being, an exercise where we cultivate compassion, we open our hearts, and our, expand our empathy towards other human beings in a very real way. And what that practice has given me is the ability to now pause, taking that pause, identify what it is that I'm feeling. If it's anger, if it's angst, what's the emotion, right? Labeling it, naming it to tame it, so to speak. And then being able to evolve beyond the fear, evolve beyond that fight, flight, fear mode that we've biologically been ingrained with, into an empathy action mode, into what scientists are now calling a tend and befriend mode. And that's the beauty of it, is that, these tools, as I mentioned earlier, one of the first things I said is, like, meditation has been sort of a superpower for me, and it can be for anyone, because it's allowed me to sort of be able to step outside of myself and put on a different lens for many different instances in my life, where I was able to see things from a different point of view. I was able to kind of like look ahead, at the consequences of certain things, and also, just connect with people in a very different way.
And now I think that meditation is something that obviously is meditation and mindfulness, and the interchangeability of those. We talk about them often. They are sort of the they are the gateway to a lot of spiritual practices, but I feel like they're very rarely defined and rarely sort of clarified, other than the sort of, like, in a way, kind of like trope of someone sitting there in lotus pose, silently, which maybe is exactly how you practice, but I would love to know what it actually looks like from a practical perspective.
Yeah, so I would love nothing more than to be able to sit in a quiet place, and meditate for 30 minutes a day, or in the morning, and be in nature and listen to bird song. But that's also not reality for like 99% of people in this world. Like, if I was living in an ashram, or if I didn't, again, have a family, or have children, or have a house full of people, as I'm talking to you from like a sliver next to a closet, right? Because I needed to find like a space. One of the places that I people think I'm joking, but it's real, that I meditate often, and I still do find peace and solace in that environment, because when I was a single mom, like, it was the only space sometimes that I would have to myself, which was the bathroom floor. Like I would go in and say, hey, I'm going to the bathroom, and I would take 10 minutes and actually not go to the bathroom at all, just go there so that I could have space. And even then I would still get notes under the door and knocks on the door. But the point of the matter is that if you can meditate in those conditions, right, then you could do it anywhere. And so for me, what my practice looks like and what it's looked like for a very long time is, and I'll use an acronym that was bestowed upon me by my good friend David G. RPM, which stands for Rise, P, Meditate. So that already lends itself to, you're in the bathroom anyway, so you might as well just squat yourself on the floor after that, lean against the cupboard or the sink, and just take those 10 minutes for yourself. And so that's oftentimes what my practice has to look like, because somebody's still sleeping in the house, or my husband's already on a Zoom call, or what have you. So, but the other part of it that's really important to tell people and to make sure they understand is that meditation doesn't just live on the cushion. For me, really, meditation lives way more, mindfulness lives way more off the cushion than it does on the cushion, because I incorporate several micro practices throughout my day. And different breathing practices, different arrival practices. So before I actually move from one activity to the other, I create these like sacred spaces where I can try to kind of reset, recalibrate. And again, that could only take 30 to 60 seconds. I'm not talking about like I need 10 minutes to do that. Literally, like just doing 2 or 3 breathing practice cycles that take 16 seconds each or less is something that can absolutely change the quality of how you show up, how present you are when you are in the middle of a conversation, or sitting down to write an email, or moving from one conversation to the next. And I think that people often discount how huge of an impact those tiny little moments can actually have in your life if you're present just for those moments, and how it can then therefore affect the way that you show up and the quality of how you show up in your life.
Yeah. And from a metaphysical perspective, we are always working with microcosms and macrocosms. We're always, every single second is the entirety of your entire existence. So even if you are reclaiming 1 second to say, I am going to show up 360 degrees as myself, really embodying this 60-second container that becomes the framework for your entire existence, should you frame it in this as above, so below axiom. It's everything is always a piece of a whole. So even the smaller bits that we can really be present and conscientious and plugged in for, ultimately become the way that we live our life. It is, how we choose to move through those transitional moments is how we live our life.
Yeah, exactly. No, and I think that for many of us, it just becomes this sort of white noise. It's like we feel like we've been hijacked. We're not even like present for those transitional moments. We just kind of move from one thing to the next really rapidly, believing that we're great at multitasking. But again, brain scientists have proven that that there is no such thing as multitasking. Your brain cannot possibly do 2 things at once. You might be really good at switching from one thing to the next, but oftentimes what that leads to is fatigue and the inability to actually be fully present. And that can affect your life beyond multitasking, in front of a computer, but actually when you're having a conversation, like how present are you? Are you thinking about something else? When you're walking in nature, are you really communing with nature? And, to borrow from the late Thich Nhat Hanh, like, are you taking a moment to mindfully walk and allow your feet to kiss the earth? Or are you just thinking about your to-do list and what you're going to eat for dinner,
Right.
And so we miss these beautiful moments in life constantly because we're not there. Like, we're physically there, but we're not there. We're not present.
how do you think, so I had some major breakthroughs from 2020 to where at the time of this recording, early 2022, relating to, you know, the significance, the power of disassociation, the role that it has played in my life because of the trauma, the specific types of trauma that I had endured in my childhood. Why, and on one hand, how it's made me an incredible astrologer, you know, to be able to create entire universes and visualize archetypes in my, you know, cerebral cognitive space, but has totally made it, you know, has made it very difficult for me to stay comfortable and remain in my body. And through a variety of different learnings and unlearnings that, you know, really were activated in 2020 for me, and then have continued to the present and will continue for the rest of my life as a commitment, realizing how much disassociation has prevented me from having uncomfortable conversations, which has prevented me from growing, which has prevented me from allowing, to really showing up in the way that other people need me to show up, and myself and others. But then when I think again about microcosms and macrocosms, I'm not alone. I'm not the only person who has who responds to being in uncomfortable environments from childhood or scary things by shutting down and going, you know, becoming very intellectual, but like sort of losing the ability to even tolerate criticism. You know what I mean? But then we have this insane backdrop of what is going on in the world. Everything is now on our phones. Everything, you know, the way that people leave comments, the way people attack others on the internet, the way we scroll mindlessly, and all of that becomes absorbed in our psyche. It feels like for me personally, it feels like in my awareness of the sort of the chronic disassociation that I've experienced and that is experienced on a societal level, reclaiming that, reintegrating that is literally against all odds, because everything is sort of saying, no, disassociate more, be less present, you know, be on, like scroll, flip, swipe, like, you know, try to manage the thousands of trolls that are coming into your messages without disassociating, you know? What are your thoughts on all of this? Like, I'm sure that this is also something that you've experienced, either individually or just through your work.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I like many people, I have a love-hate relationship with social media and with technology in general. For example, I know that the 2.1 million people that we've connected directly through Pandemic of Love over the last 2 years would have never happened had it not been for the power of social media to send a message around the world and back, and the you know, the power of technology to be able to just like connect people who are at a time of disconnection, right? Physical disconnection, but also across, you know, cities and counties and state lines. So for me, it's really just about balance, you know, and it sounds like, oh, you know, here we go, you know, this is seems like such a simple thing to do, but no, I will say, you know, it's a struggle to keep that balance, you know. The way I approach my life in general is, and maybe this is very like, man, now that I'm like thinking it, I'm speaking it out loud, I'm like, God, that's very like OCD-ish, right? In a way that it's like there's a 1-to-1 ratio for like a lot of things that I do in my life. So a simple example, some tangible examples would be whenever I, you know, hold a workshop, which I always try for them to be free. But let's say if it's not free, it's always that Tom's model, that 1-to-1, like buy a cushion gift for every person that comes that pays, there's giving something away for free. There's always that kind of balance. As it pertains to, for example, my negative self-talk, right? We all have that like little person in your brain that lives rent free that tells you, you know, that you're not worthy, or that you're not enough, or that, you know, that I thought was stupid, or that action that just happened was inept. And I'm very conscious of that voice. Excuse me. I'm very conscious of that voice. And when that voice comes into you know, my sphere of consciousness, I immediately have like trained myself habitually to say something to counter that. So if I say to myself, God, you're so stupid, I can't believe you just did that, then I immediately will say something like, but you're, you know, you're really beautiful, or you're very generous, or you're a kind person, or what have you. So I create that balance. And so as it pertains to social media and to, you know, technology, I've sort of kind of managed, I think, to figure out a way to create that balance as well, right? So I'm very conscious of how much time I'm spending on social media. What am I using it for? You know, I really like, if you've ever, you know, been on my Instagram page, for example, which is probably the account that I'm the most active on, I, generally speaking, only post, you know, on my stories when there are families in need with extenuating circumstances. So I feel like, okay, I'm using this platform for good, to help other people and to give back. You know, it's not to sell somebody something. I don't, you know, people ask me all the time, you know, if we send you this product, will you promote it, or we'll pay you to do this? And I'm like, no, that's not what I do. Like, that's not who I am. It's very inauthentic to who I am. I understand that some people make a living out of doing that, which is fine. Like, there's no judgment there. But I have chosen to use social media, you know, in for my to help other people, to amplify the work that I want to do in the world, and to create the world that I want to see, that I envision, that I know can be manifested and happen, because it is happening. And, you know, in the last 2 years, we've so many case studies of beautiful human connections and interactions that had to take place either in person or on the phone, but there had to be a real tangible connection, not just via, you know, text message or exchange, you know, of emails, but rather full conversations where people got to walk a mile in somebody's shoes, got to put on a different lens, experience, you know, being seen and heard, or have the opportunity to make somebody feel that way. And so I think it's just an incredibly beautiful, you know, way to kind of reclaim our own power versus the power of technology over us, you know. And so if I spend, you know, I have a tracker, I think we all do, especially if you have an iPhone, you know, on your phone, you can enable that, and there's different apps as well. But if I know that I'm spending, you know, 2 hours a day on my phone, then I will make sure that I'm spending 2 hours, you know, hiking out in nature, or communing without my phone, like putting my phone away, shutting it down, and having real FaceTime with the people that matter to me.
So let's talk about the pandemic of love.
Yeah.
What was that initiative?
Well, so Pandemic of Love it's so funny, because when you watch sort of like even if you watch a CNN Heroes segment, it makes it seem like I was like this, like, you know, ditzy housewife sitting at my kitchen table in South Florida. And I just happened to like accidentally start this huge mutual aid organization. And that's really not the story. Very sexy story for sure. It's a, you know, made for TV movie right there. But actually, you know, I since like 2015 started a meditation community in November of 2015 in South Florida with 12 friends who gathered on a beach to meditate. And that meditation community eventually grew to be a 15,000 person community, where we would have anywhere from 500, 600, 700 people meditating every Sunday morning on the beach together, which was an incredible, you know, experience, and which obviously stopped and ceased to in person when the pandemic started. during those years, those 5 years, pre-pandemic, you get to know people, you get to know their stories and their struggles and their strifes and what they're going through, whether it's, financially, whether it's medically, whether it's, emotionally or psychologically. And so really we had this sort of closed circuit mutual aid organization within our community. If somebody needed a ride, we would let people know, and somebody would bring that person to the beach. If somebody just lost their husband, the community would be there for them. If somebody just got diagnosed with cancer, and so on and so on. If somebody lost their job, we would help them find a job. We would make sure that they were financially okay. And it was this beautiful kind of redistribution of wealth being defined very loosely, not just as it pertains to money, but time, energy, resources, etc. And so Pandemic of Love was born out of this idea that, to bring it back kind of full circle to what we were talking about with respects to mindfulness and tend and befriend and the empathy action mode. I was very present to the fact that I was, like probably everybody in this world, feeling fear and feeling, this fear of the unknown and what's going to happen. And, how are people going to survive? Like I started thinking about the people in our community that were barely making ends meet as it was, and living hand to mouth and relying on tips and hourly wages, and worked in the hospitality industry. And here we are going into shutdown. And I was like, how are they going to feed their kids when they rely on free breakfast and lunch at the schools? That's 10 meals a week that they have to now provide to 3 children. And, this person might be a single mom, right? So as I started to feel this, fear and drop into that, I recognized that I had the power to do something about it. And so this is, again, where, the evolution of sort of using the tool of mindfulness and meditation is, I always ask, once I'm in a place where I'm really present with my emotions and I recognize them and I'm able to sit with them and label them, I move beyond that. And I ask myself 2 follow-up questions. And those are, the first question is, okay, I'm feeling this, and what am I going to do about it? And the follow-up question is, and how do I come from a place of love? And the answer of what am I going to do about it has to be tangible, right? It can't be like, well, I'm not going to think about it anymore, I'm going to let it go. Like, that's abstract. That's stop, like when people say, just let it go. I'm like, no, stop. But it has to be something really tangible. And so here I am sitting with my fear and despair and angst and etc. And now I'm thinking, and what am I going to do about it? I'm like, okay, I'm going to make sure that I make it comfortable for the people who are in need right now and freaking out probably more than I am to ask for help, make it really easy for them, and create a form, an intake form called the Get Help form. They're going to identify what it is that they need in a very tangible way. And then I'll create another form called Give Help, where the people in our community that have enough or more than enough can fill those needs for those individuals. And I'll just basically make the connection and step out of the way, right? The intent was never to create a nonprofit and to have money coming into a central account and redistributing, because I also knew that at a time of disconnection, when we couldn't see each other and people were in isolation, and some people, especially in Florida, where everybody's, grandma and grandpa go to retire, we had a lot of elderly people in our community as well that were alone, literally alone and very scared. And so it was a perfect opportunity to connect people in a really tangible way and make sure they had to have a conversation in order to transact. And that created a lot of friendships. And so fast forward to where we are today through Pandemic of Love, which is still going strong, is, as I mentioned earlier, we've made 2.1 million connections. Those connections have directly transacted between them over $61 million in 280 communities across 16 countries. And, it's really a testament to the fact that, one person can do something to change the world and make it better. And I think that sometimes we feel like the problems of the world are so daunting. And we kind of again, we're in freeze mode and we're like, well, what can I do? I'm one person. And, I call bullshit on that, actually, because you can do something. You can do something to affect, or as in the Buddhist, proverb, as a Buddhist proverb would say, tend to the area of the garden that you can reach. So what's the area of your garden that you can reach? Why are you so busy looking at your neighbor's garden or the far corner that you'll never get to? If you could just make your garden bloom, your community, however you define your community, whether it's just the people living in your household, whether it's the 5 people you work with on a daily basis, whether it's your 5 closest friends or the people who live on your floor in your building, what have you, however you define your community, if you just make sure that everybody there has enough, is doing okay, and has the capacity to thrive because they're no longer worried about surviving, then if everybody did that in this world, the world would look so much different, right? And we feel so hopeless, we feel so helpless, but we're not. We have so much power. And I think part of the affliction of really like social media, and the detriment of it is that, we see, these sort of reels of people doing these big lofty things, and so we think, oh, well, if it's not real worthy, if it's not going to go viral, then it's not worthy of like being done. And that's honestly not the case. We are all capable of throwing every single day so many pebbles into the proverbial pond, and not just to create ripples of influence, but actually a lot of those ripples will eventually become huge waves, and change a lot.
I love it. It's really inspiring. And I think that I think that it really feels empowering to imagine how a friend of mine, Veronica Varlow, who's just a brilliant witch, when her book came out a few months ago, she was talking about how, she wants people to, she only was offering signed copies when it came out at a specific local bookshop in Brooklyn. And because the energy of where we spend our money is energy, and it matters, what we do with our choices matter. And when we allow ourselves to have the confidence and the bravery to know that we matter individually, then we can start to recognize that our decisions that are small matter as much as our decisions that are large. And the large decisions are often the amalgamation of many, many small decisions that have all mattered all along the way. So it's not just about those big milestone moments, that we have, let's say like 2-3 dozen in a lifetime, those moments where you're like, wow, it's the interview that's going to change my life. It's the move that's going to change my life. It's the partner that's going to change my life. But it's actually everything that even allowed you to be in that crossroads of that choice was the byproduct of every single small gesture that you made throughout a single day,
Yeah. And that others made toward you, right? And that we do towards others. Like, you oftentimes hear, especially when people are talking about mental health, like, just making somebody feel like they matter, or just, somebody who feels unseen, saying something like, you have such a beautiful smile, or, you have great eyes to a stranger, or, just making somebody feel seen in a moment can literally change the trajectory of their life. That small gesture that you're talking about.
That is so beautiful. So this feels like a really good transition to ask the first of the 2 questions that I ask every guest on this podcast, which is, how does magic show up in your life?
Oh, magic shows up in my life every single day. I mean, magic is all around us, right? I suffer from an autoimmune condition that causes a blindness, and I'm blind in my left eye, and I'm, working on not being blind in my right eye. And when I got that diagnosis over 20 years ago, it was actually a gift for me, It was a real gift in the sense that it helped me see things in a very different light, literally see things in a different light, right? And be more present. And so there's magic all around us if we just open our eyes, to it. When I look at the way that my husband's laugh lines crinkle up, and I kind of study them, there's magic there. When I look at my mom's face and her wrinkles and all the wisdom of her years, there's magic there. When I look at the way the sunlight hits my son's eyelashes, there's magic there, and so on. So there is magic all around us, and I feel every single day that I am in a completely spiritual, magical environment, because I said it was so, and I believe it is so.
So then follow-up question, I say this thing called tank, which means there are no coincidences. So here's the tank for the follow-up question, which is, what do you believe in?
I believe in love. That's it. I believe that we are all sentient beings who are connected to each other, that we are all, we've been interconnected for millennia, since the beginning of time, however you define time and space. And I believe that the only thing that connects us truly, and that will heal us, and that will solve the problems in this world, is love.
Well, I would love to pull a card for you if you are receptive to that.
Sure, absolutely.
So the way that my deck is happiest is when we work off of a question. If we pull a general card, the deck might say, give us something very strange and nebulous, and then I'm gonna have to leave you with like a awkward, like, well, I guess go figure this out for yourself. So the more specific the question, the more that the deck is going to give us a specific answer. So do you have a specific question that is current in your life right now that we could use a single card to give us some beautiful mystical illumination?
Sure. So I'm currently living a nomadic life. I've been, after I left Florida in July of 2020, my husband and I have been in several different really beautiful locations, but we, haven't found the place where we want to settle, where we want to throw roots down again. And so I guess my question is in relation to that, like, are we going to, are we going to find the place that we need to be, or are we going to just completely continue to be Rolling Stones for the rest of our lives?
Well, I guess my question for you before I even ask the deck is the intention to find a rooted place?
Yeah, the intention is definitely, listen, at some point, my husband's in his mid 50s, like I'm, approaching 50 as well. And so, you start to think about, as you see your parents aging, and my husband's father passed away last year. And so you start to think about, at some point you're going to need to have like a home base, so yeah, the intention is absolutely to eventually have a place that we feel is it's home. It's where we want to be.
So if the intention is to find that rooted place, then instead of asking, will you, I think I'm going to ask, what should you know about that rooted place?
Yeah, great.
Does that sound
Love
good?
it. Yeah, that's a great reframe. Thanks.
Okay. So do you want me to work with pile 1, pile 2, or pile 3?
2.
Great. All right. So let's see, what should we know about this rooted place? What is the wisdom that we can glean through this card that is going to give us insight into what that looks and feels like, and how we can even identify it? This is an interesting card to pull. So we pulled the 3 of Swords. So this card is, it's so interesting. Like, we could tack on probably another 30 minutes now to the podcast, but we're not going to. But I find it fascinating to pull this card when what you believe in is love. And this card is one of the most, it's one of the most visually striking cards of this traditional deck. It is the only card that has a heart, you know, the symbol of love, and that's being punctured 3 ways. And it has a lot to do with resilience, brokenheartedness, you know, and just the capacity of healing, right? Healing love. Like, what does love look like in when it is whole, and what does love look like also when there are wounds? So you know, I guess the interpretation of this is there is complex and is myriad, and probably would ask us to pull even more cards to clarify. But for the sake of this card as its own container, maybe the rooted place is potentially it's a place that you've already been, that's a place that there's already memories that might make it feel like it's a difficult one to return to because you want it to be a fresh environment. But this is a place that the heart has already felt, and it is a returning and then a reclaiming of that environment and region with coming from a different sort of heart-led approach than how it has been in the past. Perhaps there is some sort of spiritual disappointment of like, I wanted it to be everything and more. And it's, you know, I have to make all of these like compromises because it's not the sanctuary that I had imagined it could be. But this is also the most logical and practical and important place for us to establish. But I feel like I'm being pulled to that first interpretation of it being a place that maybe you're afraid to come back to, but it also being the place that makes sense.
Interesting. That's interesting.
We shall see. You have to keep me posted.
I will, definitely.
But it does feel, you know, it feels meaningful to get this card when you believe in love. And I feel like there's just a lot of really juicy imagery and symbolism that can be unpacked from that.
Love. That's great.
So my dear, where can we find you? Where can we connect with you? And how can we continue to, and for those who also want to participate in this mutual aid network, where will they
definitely. So if you need help or if you want to give help, you just go to pandemicoflove.com. It's such a simple website to navigate. If you're interested in even kind of going a step beyond and starting a micro chapter in your community, there are tools and resources as well on the website for that. My website is shellytygielski.com, which is impossible to pronounce and spell. So if you just type in Shelley, Shelly, and the first letters of my last name, which is Tyg, it'll come up. There's very few of us Tygielskis out there. Really, as I mentioned, I'm most active on Instagram, and my handle is Mindful Skater Girl, which is a lot easier to remember and spell, and that's a whole conversation for another time. But Mindful Skater Girl, and I, as I mentioned, I post and highlight stories of connection, stories of families that are in need. And there's so many different ways to help. It's, again, not just financial. You know, you might have an old computer or laptop lying around. You may have baby clothes that you're willing to ship somewhere. You may be willing to pick up the phone and give your time to a senior, or you might be willing to buy something off somebody's Amazon wish list. So there's always amazing opportunities to be able to do something kind in the world, to create that beautiful ripple effect that we talked about. And so I hope you'll join me and you'll join our community of care.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.